Welcome to my channel. Support our channel by subscribing. Your subscription helps us grow and create more intriguing content like this. Now, let's dive into today's story. Ethan Lawson, a tech entrepreneur in his mid-30s, poured his heart and soul into his business, often leaving his personal life on the back burner. His wife, Lily, also in her 30s, ran a successful online boutique and took great pride in her work. Despite their busy lives, Ethan thought they shared a strong bond, until a single day changed everything. Mark Everett, their landlord and a familiar face in their neighborhood, was a friendly man in his 40s, frequently around for minor repairs and friendly chats. However, he had a hidden side that would soon unravel Ethan's life. Ethan hadn't taken a day off in months. The stress of running his tech consultancy was unrelenting, but today he decided to listen to his body's call for rest. He woke up feeling fatigued, and for once he allowed himself the luxury of a day to recharge. Thoughts of reconnecting with Lily filled his mind. Their interactions lately had been strained, with both buried in work, but he missed her company. He remembered when they'd spend entire weekends together, just talking or exploring new places. Smiling, he thought today could be a fresh start. He sent Lily a quick text. "Hey, thought I'd surprise you with lunch today. Let's take a break together." Her response, though, felt colder than he'd hoped. "Busy with work. Maybe some other time." Ethan's heart sank slightly, but he reasoned that she was likely having a rough day, too. After all, running her boutique took as much energy as his consultancy did. Determined not to let this setback ruin his day, Ethan decided he'd surprise her with her favorite lunch anyway. Later in the day, he stopped by a local cafe, picking up her go-to meal and a small bouquet. Driving back home, he envisioned her face lighting up at the sight of the surprise lunch, hoping it might rekindle the closeness they once shared. His day off was turning out differently than he'd planned, but he remained optimistic. But as he pulled up to their house, a strange car parked outside caught his eye. It was sleek and unfamiliar, definitely not a friend's. At first, he dismissed it, thinking it could belong to a contractor or delivery person. However, the feeling of unease was hard to ignore. As he approached the door, he heard laughter, Lily's, interwoven with a man's voice that sounded unsettlingly familiar. Standing at the door, bouquet in hand, he felt his stomach churn. He told himself he was overreacting, but a gnawing suspicion urged him to step inside quietly. As Ethan entered their house, he moved cautiously, his footsteps barely audible. The laughter he'd heard from outside was now clearer. It was indeed Lily, but her tone wasn't one he recognized. She sounded carefree, almost flirtatious, something he hadn't heard in months. The man's voice, distinct and unsettling, became clearer too. That's when it hit him. It was Mark, their landlord. Ethan's grip on the bouquet tightened as he moved closer to the living room. Ethan observed them from behind the doorframe, feeling his heart pound in his chest. The sight before him made his breath catch. There, on their couch, sat Lily and Mark, far too close for comfort. Mark's hand rested casually on Lily's knee, his body language relaxed and intimate. Lily, instead of moving away, seemed comfortable, her laughter soft and familiar in a way that shattered Ethan's perception of their relationship. For a moment, Ethan felt as though he were outside his own body, watching from a distance. His mind raced, each thought cutting deeper than the last. How long had this been going on? Had she been playing him all this time? The cufflink he'd found on the windowsill that morning suddenly took on a new meaning. How many signs had he ignored? Summoning his composure, he stepped into the room. "Am I interrupting something?" he asked, his voice steady but laced with pain. Lily's face turned pale, and she shot up from the couch, eyes wide with shock. Mark, too, stiffened, removing his hand from her knee. "Ethan, it's not what it looks like," Lily stammered, her voice trembling, but the look in her eyes told him the truth. Ethan felt his heart shatter as he looked at her. Words failed him as he turned and walked out, leaving the bouquet and takeout on the table, a cruel symbol of what he'd hoped today would be. Ethan didn't go far. He stood on the front porch, fighting back tears as he processed the betrayal he had just witnessed. The love he had poured into their relationship, the sacrifices he had made, everything felt like a cruel joke. He paced back and forth, emotions raging. Every fiber of his being screamed to leave, but something inside him needed closure. After a few minutes, he walked back inside, determined to confront her. Lily was still sitting on the couch, staring at the floor, while Mark looked as though he'd rather disappear than face Ethan's wrath. "How long has this been going on?" Ethan demanded, his voice low but fierce. His eyes were locked onto Lily, who couldn't meet his gaze. Lily fumbled with her words. "Ethan, I'm so sorry. It just happened. It didn't mean anything." "Didn't mean anything?" Ethan repeated, his voice rising. "You've been seeing him here in our home and it didn't mean anything? Is that what I am to you?" Mark tried to interject, but Ethan silenced him with a glare. "Get out," he said firmly. "Leave, now." Mark didn't need to be told twice. He grabbed his jacket and made a hasty exit, muttering apologies that fell on deaf ears. Once they were alone, Lily broke down. "Ethan, please let me explain. I was lonely. You've been so distant, always at work. I didn't feel loved anymore." Ethan laughed bitterly. "So this is my fault? I was working to build a future for us, and this is how you repay me?" Lily's tears flowed freely, and she reached out to him, but Ethan pulled away. "I don't know if I can ever forgive you," he said, his voice cold. "Right now, I need space." Her face crumpled, but she nodded, grateful he hadn't asked her to leave immediately. She couldn't have known that this was the calm before the storm he was about to unleash. Over the next few days, Ethan maintained a veneer of calm. He allowed Lily to think he was considering reconciliation, even allowing her to stay at home, giving her a glimmer of hope that their relationship might survive this. But inside, he was seething. Every time he looked at her, memories of that betrayal replayed in his mind, each one fueling his resolve. Lily, oblivious to the storm brewing within him, did her best to make amends. She cooked his favorite meals, left him apologetic notes, and tried to initiate conversations about their relationship. Ethan responded with minimal engagement, giving her just enough to believe that forgiveness was possible. In reality, he was biding his time, plotting his revenge with meticulous detail. He spent hours at night going through her boutique's online platform, reviewing all the work he had helped her set up. He had access to her inventory, her customer lists, her social media accounts, all the tools she had relied on to grow her business. Slowly, he began gathering everything he needed to execute his plan. During the day, he kept up the act, even suggesting they go to counseling. Lily's relief was palpable. She believed their relationship could be saved. She had no idea that he was waiting for the perfect moment to pull the rug out from under her. He wanted her to feel secure, to believe they had a future, before he took everything away. One evening, when Lily left to visit a friend, Ethan decided it was time to begin. He accessed her website, deleting products one by one, erasing the customer database she had built painstakingly over years. With every click, he felt a grim satisfaction, knowing he was dismantling the business that meant so much to her. He drafted a cryptic message to her loyal customers, apologizing for the sudden closure and stating that the boutique would be shutting down indefinitely. His hands didn't tremble. His actions were steady and purposeful. He imagined the devastation Lily would feel when she discovered her life's work, her pride and joy, had been erased. When she returned that night, he said nothing, acting as though everything were normal. He could see the spark of hope in her eyes, the belief that they could repair what she had broken. Little did she know that by morning, everything she had worked for would be gone. The next morning, Lily awoke to a flurry of messages from her customers. Confused, she opened her laptop, her heart racing as she discovered her entire boutique had vanished. Her products, her customer list, her website, all gone. Panic overtook her as she tried to recover the files, but it was too late. Everything had been wiped. In desperation, she turned to Ethan. "My business. It's gone." Someone hacked it. Everything is gone. Ethan met her gaze with cold indifference. Maybe now you know how it feels, he said quietly, his voice devoid of sympathy. Her face crumpled as realization dawned. This was his doing, a calculated revenge to make her feel the same sense of betrayal she had inflicted on him. She fell to her knees, sobbing, but Ethan remained unmoved. The sight of her despair gave him a bittersweet satisfaction. He had loved her deeply, but that love had been shattered, replaced with a hollow sense of justice. In the weeks that followed, Ethan filed for divorce. He watched Lily struggle to rebuild her life, haunted by her actions and the consequences they had brought. The weight of betrayal still lingered, but for Ethan, each day brought a renewed sense of freedom. He no longer felt shackled by the hurt she had caused, finding solace
in the knowledge that he had found closure. Thank you for watching this story. Betrayal can come from those closest to us, but in the darkest moments we find our strength. Let us know your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories.
Steve Jones sat on the rear patio, gazing at the sunset over the ocean. He mused that they should have relocated here ages ago. The allure and serenity of this spot were enchanting. Here refers to a small island off the north coast of Cornwall. Throughout their 22-year marriage, Steve's wife, Claire, persistently suggested, persuaded, and eventually convinced him to move from London to this place, where she and her family had deep roots. Improved transportation and technology, along with COVID, finally enabled him to work remotely enough to make the move feasible. With visits to the city limited to once a month, Claire, who still lived in London, regularly returned to the island to reconnect with family, friends, and, most importantly, her mother. They purchased the house from Claire's cousin 2 years prior, but only made the move 6 months ago. In the interim, Claire utilized her visits to undertake repairs and use it as a home base. Following the completion of extensive construction, the house now faced west, overlooking the bay, offering Steve a breathtaking sunset view as he enjoyed a refreshing beer. Originally a farm, the property retained nearby meadows and orchards, with signs of recent tree planting, likely part of Claire's landscaping efforts the prior spring. Trees and orchards appeared to be prevalent across the island, prompting Steve to ponder whether they served to shield against the brisk sea winds or, more likely, to yield the beloved cider cherished by locals. He conceded it was a wise decision. Claire had been right. Life on the island operated at a distinct pace, revolving around tight-knit circles, many of which comprised Claire's relatives. Claire reveled in her return home, seemingly acquainted with everyone on the island. As an outsider, Steve perceived a certain aloofness from the locals, yet he appreciated their direct mannerisms. The collective unity displayed by everyone impressed him, leading him to speculate whether it stemmed from the self-reliance essential for a small island community's survival. Steve and Claire crossed paths at university, both pursuing degrees in business. Claire focused on marketing, while Steve delved into new technologies. Their bond blossomed, culminating in marriage shortly after graduation, with a mutual decision to settle in London for enhanced career prospects. Though married for 22 years, Steve still finds Claire stunning. While her hair gradually shortened, now styled in a pulled-back fashion with a touch of golden hue accentuating her natural blonde locks, he noticed her concern over the slight weight gain she experienced over the years. However, he cherished the subtle changes in her physique, her silhouette becoming fuller, her hips and bust embracing a more pronounced curve. Her eyes retained their familiar hue, blue-gray with specks of yellow in the irises. Unlike Steve, she never appeared disheveled or opted for sweatpants, maintaining a timeless appearance. He had never witnessed his wife so elated, fully immersed in island life and actively engaged in various committee endeavors. Her current undertaking involved coordinating a solstice festival. Their daughters, Nicole and Michelle, arrived shortly after their wedding, grew up, and pursued studies at Durham University, a factor influencing Steve and Claire's decision to relocate. Based on their social media activity, the girls seemed to be relishing university experiences to the fullest. Despite Nicole's penchant for procrastination, Steve remained confident they had ample time to complete all necessary tasks. He found solace in the island's history, often indulging in evenings at the local pub, listening intently to age-old fishing tales. Several antiquated books chronicled the island's history, housed within a small schoolhouse doubling as a library and village hall for social gatherings. Surveying the attic of their home for the first time, Steve hoped to uncover more insights into the island's past. Amongst the aged beds, furniture, and toys, he stumbled upon a weathered box containing a handwritten manuscript titled Tales from the Island, authored by Melissa Taylor, his wife's maiden name. Seating himself on a wicker stool, he perused the manuscript, admiring the elegant, swirling script detailing a blend of ancestral stories and personal experiences. Illustrations of trees captured Steve's interest as he skimmed through the faded yet evocative text, piecing together fragments of the narrative. The tradition's origins trace back to 1287, during the Plantagenet era, when the law of the first night, also known as jus primae noctis, became part of marriage licenses. Under this law, the ruling lord held the right to spend the initial night with any newlywed bride within his domain. Steve recalled a similar concept from the William Wallace movie featuring Mel Gibson, though he suspected it to be a myth adopted by Hollywood for added intrigue. As he delved deeper into the text, Steve learned of the groom's anguish caused by this practice. To preempt any potential retaliation, elder women spent a night with the groom, eventually evolving to one of the senior women sharing the groom's bed to ensure fairness for the couple. For 2.5 centuries, the plague ravaged English society, decimating populations, including on the island. Following a severe outbreak in 1622, concerns arose regarding the island's viability, leading to serious contemplation of its abandonment. Following these events, rumors circulated regarding partner swaps on April Fool's Day, linked to efforts to populate the island. Widows were encouraged to seek companionship among younger men. With the onset of the Great War, nearly all island men enlisted in the British Army's ranks. Many never returned, prompting adjustments to the island's customs to provide unmarried men heading to war with surrogate partners before conscription. This practice resurfaced, albeit to a lesser extent during World War II. The narrative then transitions to Melissa's experiences in the 1950s. Despite challenges like the influx of outsiders and displacement of locals, the tradition persists in certain families. Elders staunchly defend its value as a cultural practice. Married women who've raised children offer surrogacy to 18-year-old men, easing concerns about pureness loss and imparting marital wisdom. Divorce remains rare on the island. This tradition also mitigates adolescent pregnancies seen as communal service with rewards after years of child-rearing. It curbs empty nest syndrome and extramarital affairs. Melissa recounts her own surrogacy for an 18-year-old named Robert when she was 46, while her husband focused on business. Robert's reward for planting trees during the festival was time in Melissa's marital bed, symbolizing renewal. The text suggests that Melissa's husband was aware of the arrangement, but never broached the subject. She observed Robert's evolution from a timid adolescent to a confident man. Their initial encounter was brief and awkward, but Melissa provided comfort, gradually fostering closeness. Throughout the week, Robert's skills and self-assurance flourished. Melissa not only addressed physical aspects, but also conveyed her desires, emotions, and relationship dynamics. Steve marveled at the remarkable tale, pondering its authenticity. While historical references lent credence, the narrative seemed improbable. It could either be the author's creative invention or a means to justify her narrative. Months later, Steve contemplated his return to the city for work. With Claire's extensive shopping list, he opted to extend his trip by a day to reconnect with old friends. Timing his departure after the festival, he aimed to be back by the following Saturday. Claire welcomed the news, anticipating Steve's assistance with festival preparations and his willingness to tackle her shopping tasks. The festival day engaged the entire island, featuring children's games and sports during the day and evening festivities with dancing and drinks for adults. As the evening program commenced, Steve met some islanders he hadn't encountered before, including John Fraser, his wife Angela, and their son Jake, who seemed close in age to Steve's youngest daughter. Jake's formal handshake struck Steve as odd, but the moment passed quickly. Among the island's oldest families alongside the Taylors, the Frasers, Steve once again felt like an outsider. While Claire and the Frasers delved into familial connections later that evening, Steve noticed a group of young men casting admiring glances at Claire. He couldn't blame them. She looked stunning in her chosen summer dress, highlighting her ample bosom and shapely legs. Their persistent looks began to irk Steve. Just as he was about to intervene, Claire's mother intervened first, ushering them all back to the cider bar. Steve chuckled inwardly, noting the wariness the young men seemed to have toward Claire's mom. Diana, however, commanded respect, a formidable figure and leader of the Council of Elders. It was clear where Claire inherited her striking looks. Diana Taylor remained a striking woman, more akin to Claire's older sister than her mother. He returned to watch the dancing, which engaged people of all ages. Steve felt the cider's effects, but decided he could handle more. Everyone seemed to share the same mood, making it a challenge for him to serve himself. Upon his return, he realized Claire was missing and began scanning the area. To his surprise, he found her conversing with Jake Fraser, who had moved away as Steve approached. "What's going on?" Steve inquired. "Jake is interested in landscaping work. I was discussing options and costs," Claire explained. "Do we have work for him?" "Yes, and there's a tradition of planting and rejuvenating trees around the festival time, so it's perfect." The mention of trees triggered memories of a manuscript Steve had recently read. "So Jake will be planting trees?" "Yes, he can start next week." Claire observed Steve's reaction. "Are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost," Steve replied slowly. "What will Jake receive in return?" "Money, of course, but we haven't settled on the amount yet." "Will there be other arrangements besides payment for his services? What are you implying?" Steve pressed. "So this has nothing to do with the island's traditions?" Claire retorted sharply. "What traditions? You know about the solstice tradition. Are you insinuating I'm planning to have an affair with Jake Fraser while you're away next week?" Claire broke into tears and fled, leaving Steve in shock. He started to doubt himself. What if he had wrongly accused Claire? He regretted drinking so much. His thoughts were muddled, making it hard to think clearly. He began ascending the narrow road toward their house, hoping a walk would clear his mind. It felt like the longest walk of his life. Perhaps he had misunderstood something or overreacted to the situation. Upon reaching home, Claire was nowhere to be found. Exhausted, he collapsed onto the sofa, succumbing to drinks and fatigue-induced sleep. The following morning, Claire still hadn't returned, leading Steve to suspect she might have spent the night with her lover. However, he suspected she was with her mother, a suspicion confirmed when Claire and Diana arrived at the door. Diana took charge of the conversation, berating Steve for upsetting Claire and insinuating he was never good enough for her. It was a barrage of words, difficult to keep track of, but the underlying message was clear. How dare he treat Claire that way? He listened quietly as Claire spoke, her eyes glistening with tears. Eventually, unable to endure it any longer, he raised his hand to halt her mother. "I have a straightforward question. Is there indeed such a tradition? And are you intending to sleep with Jake Fraser next week?" Claire turned to her mother with a defeated expression, and everything clicked into place for Steve. "Yes, Steve. Some old families still observe the tradition, or at least a part of it. The Frasers have requested its enactment, and we are obligated to adhere to it. I asked Claire to consider it. It encompasses everything related to a boy's coming of age. It's about education regarding how to treat women respectfully. It's not what you would consider lovemaking, nor is it an affair. This tradition, centuries old, has aided the island in surviving tough times. It's a vital societal obligation that we fulfill. It's the reason we have low youth crime rates, no divorces, just happy, tightly knit families. I'm sure you've noticed that yourself, Steve," he sighed. "So it's all true. Married women are entertaining eager young men for the greater good," Diana retorted. "Let's not be crass. You're an outsider and don't grasp the significance of this to us. It's deeply ingrained in every story we hear growing up here. If you were from here, you'd receive the same benefits at 18, making you a better man. I doubt you'd turn down such an offer, Steve. Nowadays, there aren't any ancient laws, plagues, or wars driving this. You do it because you find pleasure in it. Diana, care to share how many times you've fulfilled this role? With your charm, you've likely been sought after for numerous executions of the agreement. I imagine you've had quite a bit of enjoyment for weeks." Diana appeared momentarily speechless, but quickly regained her composure. "Yes, I've fulfilled my obligation several times, and I take pride in it, just as you should be proud of Claire's sacrifice. Please, Steve, allow Claire to proceed. You can't grasp how significant this is to us." Steve turned to his wife. "So you're willing to do this?" I believe so. I'm prepared to make this sacrifice. Like my mother said, I want to become integrated into society. My departure for university and marriage left many unhappy, as I didn't return here or fulfill the responsibilities others carried." Steve interjected, "So, this is a sacrifice? Wasn't this something you desired yourself?" "It seems odd given how elated you were about my move to London. You seemed thrilled." Claire blushed, then continued, I simply felt relieved that I could handle everything without affecting you, and I'm confident it won't affect me. I'm absolutely certain it won't impact our relationship in any way. Besides, engaging in closeness with another man, deceiving others, being aware of what occurred, and keeping your oblivious husband unaware. Maybe you're onto something. Claire and Diana winced at Steve's sardonic reply. Then Diana intervened. Why don't we all take some time to cool off and discuss everything, now that everything is out in the open, as it should be, and nothing has transpired yet? Claire remained at their residence, but communication between them was sparse. Steve couldn't comprehend why Claire was considering going through with this. He anticipated her abandoning the idea, yet she appeared fixated on the island's tradition, regardless of its impact on their relationship. Claire insisted that transparency would improve things. She vowed to be forthcoming with Steve, even if it led to challenging discussions. Steve found himself somewhat taken aback by Claire's unwavering confidence and insistence that such an arrangement wouldn't impact their relationship. Diana returned on Wednesday while Claire was out, leading Steve to suspect they had privately agreed upon a meeting time. "Can we have a talk, Steve?" Steve gestured toward the kitchen table, and they both sat down. "Firstly, I want to apologize. This shouldn't have occurred, and it's my responsibility, not Claire's," Steve responded. "Claire is fully capable of making her own choices, and it seems this decision has already been made. Despite my reservations, she loves you deeply and believes strongly in your ability as a couple to navigate this," Steve replied somberly. "Yet neither of you seem to grasp how deeply this affects me. It's a genuine betrayal. When I was 18, I wasn't here, and unlike everyone else, I didn't live my life with the understanding that this could happen to my wife." "I understand, Steve, and it must be incredibly challenging. It's hard to convey how differently we view this. We don't perceive it as infidelity. It holds significant importance to us, and Claire sees it as a means to reintegrate into the island community." After a brief silence, Diana continued, "What will you do if she agrees to this?" Steve sighed, reluctant to voice his thoughts, but did so nonetheless. "I won't tolerate it." Diana appeared to ponder the situation before speaking again. "What if there's a way to balance things out? Perhaps giving you the opportunity to experience what you missed when you were 18. Steve must have looked as bewildered as he felt. Diana continued, "I spoke with 2 other elders, and we reached an agreement that the elders would extend to you a similar arrangement as Claire's." Suddenly, a realization dawned on Steve. "Are you proposing that I engage in carnal relations with Helen Brown or Moira Fraser?" Memories of meeting these 2 women flooded Steve's mind. Helen, a widow from a young age, whom Steve presumed to be around his wife's age. With her long black hair and deep brown eyes, she maintained a slender figure and was undeniably attractive. Steve didn't know Moira Fraser well, but he knew she was happily married and related to the other Frasers. As the headmistress of a small school, Moira boasted reddish-blonde curly hair and a graceful figure, often showcasing ample cleavage. Steve lifted his gaze from his memories. "Yes, Steve, the elders are open to offering this, demonstrating the significance of this to us." Claire's involvement was not taken lightly. Despite the apparent temptation, Steve found the entire proposal ludicrous. "You're an exceptional woman, Diana, and also an elder. Aren't you also included in this arrangement?" Diana hesitated, unsure if Steve was serious. "If that's what you require, Steve, then yes, I consent. I won't be the one responsible for forsaking centuries-old traditions." Steve shook his head, astonished by Diana's willingness to go to such lengths. He dreaded having to explain this arrangement to his father and the authorities. "You know, Diana, some traditions have overstayed their welcome, and it's appropriate that they fade away," Steve remarked. Diana's smile vanished. "Our offer remains, Steve, and you won't regret it. I can assure you of that. Think it over carefully." When Steve recounted the incident to Claire, she already seemed aware of the elder's proposition, but Diana's involvement left her shocked and in tears. "I never imagined she would consider this. It's all too much. I won't go through with it, Steve. This has to stop." Steve felt a wave of relief, finally acknowledging how bizarre the whole situation was. "Thank goodness. I can't express how relieved I am." Claire cried and spent most of the night either apologizing or reiterating her love for Steve. The situation remained awkward and uncertain, with Steve still grappling with Claire's earlier intentions and her belief that the proposal was reasonable. On Friday, Diana returned, visibly angry about Claire's change of heart. accusing Steve of being a manipulative outsider who could never understand her. Steve grew weary of the accusations. "Why don't you be honest, Diana, and admit that for you, this is just a way to taunt your husband?" Diana was taken aback. "Fine. If you want the truth, we're enjoying ourselves. Having a young man in our bed, obeying our every command, is a dream come true. We lavish them with everything repeatedly, and everyone in the Fraser family is gifted." "Can you believe this?" Claire groaned. "Oh, for heaven's sake, Mom, please be quiet. You're ruining everything," Steve chuckled in response. "Let her speak. It's the most genuine thing I've heard from her," he added. Diana attempted to interject, but Claire intervened, urging her to leave and not return until she supported her decision. It was the first time Steve witnessed Claire standing up to Diana, and he couldn't discern who was more surprised when Diana stormed out of the house. In the ensuing weeks, the situation remained strained. Claire incessantly apologized for considering the arrangement and for asking Steve to accept it. She felt bound by tradition due to her mother's influence and hadn't considered the ramifications. Steve grappled with the dilemma of returning to the city for work. He couldn't delay it any longer, but the idea of leaving Claire on the island filled him with dread. Sensing his anxiety, Claire insisted on accompanying him, taking time off from her own job. The divide between her and her mother widened. They didn't speak, and Claire never broached the topic of the tradition again. After much deliberation and concern, Steve concluded that he needed to trust Claire and embark on the journey alone. Claire attempted once more to persuade Steve to let her join him, but he understood that she was engrossed in preparing a major marketing proposal and needed time to focus. Claire promised daily calls and frequent communication. Steve departed for London. The journey, involving ferry, taxi, train, and subway, left him exhausted, and he collapsed onto his hotel bed by 9 in the evening. He phoned Claire, who promptly picked up, and they conversed at length, sharing details of his trip and the city's changes. London seemed to be in a constant state of construction. Following their chat, Steve promptly drifted off to sleep, utterly drained. Despite a few taxing days at work, he felt rejuvenated. Being away from the island had provided clarity of mind. He began to ponder his relationship with Claire, mentally replaying their conversations. The man who once sought connection with a younger man seemed as distant from the woman he wedded as from the nurturing mother of his children. He sensed Diana's excessive influence over Claire and was relieved by their argument. Diana had crossed a line, and he hoped it marked the end of it. Yet, he couldn't reconcile Claire's actions and her certainty that the agreement wouldn't affect their relationship, a thought that continued to nag at him. Suddenly recalling the trees planted on their property the prior spring, Steve froze. Claire had been making regular visits to the island over the past year. A sense of dread washed over Steve as he considered who might have planted those trees. Perhaps her fervent advocacy this time stemmed from a need to justify her prior actions. He dialed Claire, and she picked up promptly. "Steve," he began, "doesn't Jake Fraser have an older brother?" There was a brief silence before Claire replied casually, "Yes, I believe he does." Despite our family's long history, there was a gap. "Right, Steve. His brother's name is Glenn," Steve continued. "He's around 19. After a moment's pause, Claire softly admitted, "Yes, that's correct. And it was Glenn who planted the trees last year." Silence followed. Steve pressed on. "And what did Glenn Fraser receive for this?" Claire snapped out of her reverie. "Just payment, Steve. Their family handles all the landscaping on the island." "So you're not entertaining Jake Fraser at this moment, are you?" Claire sighed. "No, Steve, I'm not entertaining anyone. You need to let go of this jealousy." Before she could say more, Steve hung up, ignoring subsequent calls from Claire. He needed time to process. Finally, on Friday morning, Steve answered the phone, catching Claire off guard. "Steve, thank goodness you picked up. I've been worried," she exclaimed. "Indeed. That's all," Steve replied tersely. "Of course, I love you more than anything. What time will you be back tomorrow? Should we discuss this?" Steve's calm demeanor unsettled Claire. "I won't be coming back. I'll stay here for a while," he declared. Panic surged through Claire. "Please don't do this. We need to resolve this as soon as possible." Steve's tone remained eerily composed. "True, but you didn't rush to London to do so, and you only called me during the day. I understand your evenings have been quite occupied." "Please, Steve, come home. I haven't done anything. It's just your paranoia. Come home and we can work through this," pleaded Claire. 5 days later, Steve arrived back on the island via ferry. Upon reaching the house, Claire and Diana were already there, evidently aware of his return. Claire attempted to embrace him, but Steve pulled away, prompting Claire to burst into tears while Diana looked livid. "Why are you here, Diana? This is between Claire and me," Steve demanded. "Am I correct in understanding that you two never fought?" Before Diana could reply, Claire interjected, "We did have a disagreement, but when you didn't come home, I needed support, and you weren't here." Steve furrowed his brow. "It's hard to believe that my mother-in-law would reconcile without getting her way. Given her efforts to reach an agreement, I doubt she would relent. I assume you both conspired to cover it up, as I refused to participate." Claire's eyes widened. "This is spiraling out of control, Steve. I haven't done anything," she insisted. Steve persisted. "So you both agreed to lie and conceal it?" "Because I refused." The argument ensued, going around in circles. Steve was convinced Claire had been unfaithful, but she vehemently denied it. Eventually, he retreated to the spare room, leaving Claire and Diana alone. The following day, Steve braced himself for a difficult conversation with his father-in-law, Bill Taylor, knowing it wouldn't be easy. Despite their usual rapport, Bill greeted Steve with a handshake, acknowledging he'd been anticipating their talk. They delved into tradition, and Bill disclosed that roughly 20 years ago, Diana had a brief affair with John Fraser. While he disapproved, he likened it to a youthful escapade he himself had enjoyed at 18. Steve carefully broached Diana's admission of recent rendezvous, querying if it was plausible. Bill was dismayed, confessing he had sensed something amiss, and his absence on a commercial fishing trip had provided ample opportunity. Steve inquired of Bill if he was aware of his daughter's actions. Bill acknowledged that Diana and Claire were very close, but attempted to keep him in the dark. "About a week before you left for London, they indicated that the plan was already set," he disclosed. Claire, seated at the kitchen table, couldn't meet Steve's gaze. "I can't believe my dad is going to divorce my mom, and we're the reason for it," she lamented. Diana made her own bed, asserting, "Your father would never condone this level of deceit and dishonesty. She continues to deny everything, despite John Fraser admitting the truth, and he's not the only one." After a prolonged silence, Claire murmured, "I know, that's why I feel I should tell you something." Steve remained silent. "I'm sorry, Steve, but I made an arrangement with Jake." The outburst Claire anticipated never materialized. "And last year with Glenn Fraser," she added quietly. Claire nodded in acknowledgement. Steve struggled to find words. "Please, Steve, this shouldn't alter our relationship. We've had 22 wonderful years together." "How can you say that? This changes everything," Steve retorted. "I'm deeply sorry, Steve. I felt compelled to fulfill family obligations," Claire explained. Steve seethed with anger. "That's absurd. You simply wanted to engage in relations with another man." "I did, and I enjoyed it so much that I did it again." "It wasn't like that. It was a duty, an obligation," Claire insisted. "So you didn't derive any pleasure from it?" Claire hesitated, aware of the precarious ground she was on. "It was mundane, unlike ours. Just physical, not carnal. It happened once. It won't occur again." "But it wasn't a one-time occurrence. You did it twice. You engaged in relations with both your brothers when they were barely 18. That makes you nothing more than promiscuous," Steve accused. Claire flinched at Steve's verbal assault. "I'm not like that. I was upholding a tradition. It's about guiding young men on their journey to manhood, that's all." "They were very appreciative," she defended. Claire realized she had made another error. As soon as she spoke, Steve erupted. "Oh, I bet they were damn appreciative. You claim it was a one-time thing, but how many times did you do this before they came of age? Tell me, how many times? If I were 18, I'd be damn eager to please. And having a woman at my disposal for the evening and night, that's at least 5 times a day, so maybe 35, once a week. It's unlikely to be just once." Claire couldn't deny it. Both Glenn and Jake were eager to please. Little training was required, though some patience was needed at the start of the week. She relished their sculpted bodies. Just as her mother had predicted, the encounters were thrilling. She particularly enjoyed teasing them with glimpses of stockings or cleavage, knowing that she would fully surrender to them that night. At one point, Jake even confessed his love for her. It was the only moment she realized how a week could impact her normal life and cherished marriage, and she wasted no time in clarifying the reality to Jake. Steve's tirade continued. "And what exactly does an 18-year-old need these days? I bet they had their sights set on you from day one, and you couldn't get enough, could you?" Claire wept. "It's not like that. It was meant to be a thrilling adventure. It was just physical. I know it stings your pride, but I only desire you. and you're the one who completes me." Steve became enraged. "I'd argue it's more about trust and vows than ego. What about your wedding vows? Does tradition override them? It's not ego when your life partner betrays you. And for what? Not for anything significant or with serious consequences, but for the sake of traditional lovemaking with some men." Claire blushed. "I understand you're angry and upset with me, but we're strong enough to overcome this. After Glenn, you didn't notice anything, but we grew closer. I thought it would be the same with Jake. I didn't know because I trusted the woman I loved selflessly. Believe me, I'll never do anything like that again." "Should I believe you?" "Trust you? You must be joking," Claire shot back, almost shouting. "You can, I swear. I'm truly sorry for hurting you. Think about the wonderful life we still have ahead. We can return to how things used to be." "Did you think about our wonderful life when you were scheming all this and lying on your back? No, I'd never have imagined this if I'd known the consequences. I'd never deliberately hurt you, but I did anyway." "I know. And I'm really sorry, and what do you think of it?" Claire was at a loss for words. "Clearly you don't grasp how I feel. You ripped out my heart and soul. How the hell can you fix this, Claire?" With that, Steve stormed off before he did something he would regret. He continued walking, attempting to clear his head, but even the beauty of the evening sunset failed to improve his mood. As he turned back towards the village, he was surprised to encounter Elder Helen Brown. Steve could barely manage a nod in return to her greeting. Helen smiled knowingly, acknowledging that their meeting was no coincidence. Observing Steve heading towards the cliff path, she anticipated catching up with him upon his return. Helen offered to sit on a rock ledge and cautiously inquired if Steve would share anything about his circumstances. Steve saw no reason to withhold anything and proceeded to divulge everything. Yet, speaking aloud failed to alleviate the weight burdening his shoulders. Helen listened attentively without interruption. Steve hesitated to mention Diana's proposition involving one of the elders engaging in carnal activity with him in exchange for Claire fulfilling her obligations. However, he decided to include it verbatim, considering Helen's involvement in the saga. Upon completion, Helen remained silent for a prolonged period before responding, "Steve, I never made such an offer. Diana never discussed any agreements with me or Moira. It's not something we would even consider. I suspect Diana was attempting to manipulate you into agreeing to extramarital relations to justify their plans." Steve was baffled by her response. Helen added, "Furthermore, these arrangements mostly vanished decades ago, and even then, it was only for the first night, never a week. Week-long arrangements were typically for household chores or planting, with one night of union at the end. Perhaps Melissa, Diana, and Susan acted out of necessity." Steve shook his head in disbelief. Just as he started to come to terms with his wife's actions, another shock emerged. Helen assured him that she would discuss the matter with Moira and take the necessary steps to strip Diana of her elder status. She acknowledged that it would be scandalous, as such actions had never occurred before, but deemed Diana's behavior unforgivable. Nowadays, elders are expected to engage in social activities and support the island's inhabitants. Helen gazed at Steve. "What's your plan?" Steve shrugged. "I can't get her to grasp the consequences, but I want her to feel what I'm feeling right now." They sat in silence until Steve noticed a faint smile playing at the corner of Helen's mouth. "What's amusing you?" he inquired. Helen's smile broadened as she proposed, "What if you stay with me for a week? Seriously, we won't let Claire and Diana in on it. We'll tell them I'm honored to accept the agreement offered on my behalf as an elder. That way, you give Claire a taste of her own medicine, and I get to needle Diana for dragging my name into this mess." Steve was intrigued but voiced concern. "Won't this injure your reputation? I'm still married, and people will talk." Helen dismissed his worry. "I couldn't care less about gossip. And truth be told, nearly the whole island already knows about your situation, Steve." The realization stung, but Steve's spirits lifted with a pleasant idea he shared with Helen. "Seriously, I'd love to plant some trees for you. It'll give Claire and Diana pause." They chuckled together and swiftly resolved all the details. Steve returned home and quickly packed his belongings. To Claire, he simply explained that upon reflection, he had decided to accept her mother's gracious offer regarding the island's elder, and given the circumstances, spending a week with another woman seemed quite reasonable. He left Claire in tears, pleading with him not to proceed. His time with Helen proved unexpectedly pleasant. She proved to be excellent company and a skilled cook. Steve busied himself with home improvements and even planted a few trees in the backyard. They also discussed Steve's predicament. He hoped this week would give Claire some insight into his feelings, but he soon noticed signs that Claire grasped the gravity of her actions. Reconciliation seemed out of reach. True to his promise, Steve refrained from closeness with Helen, though they came close a couple of times, not from lack of desire. Soon after, Claire confronted Helen at the village store, accusing her of having an affair with Steve. Helen responded with a sweet smile. "Claire, dear, you know well this isn't an affair. It's an arrangement, and it won't impact your marriage," Helen replied calmly, echoing Claire's own words. Claire persisted. "You can't do this. He's my husband, and you should know I'm fulfilling the offer made by your mother on my behalf. Who was it? Me, Moira, or even your mother for a week? Steve made his choice, and I'm bound to honor tradition. It could have been worse. He could have chosen Diana. I've promised to return him safe and sound, albeit a bit weary." Claire was taken aback. You old strumpet," Helen responded calmly. "I would have thought that term would be more fitting for someone who slept with 18-year-old boys behind her faithful husband." With that, Helen stormed off, leaving Claire speechless as the villagers in the shop watched. The next day, Claire, enraged and hysterical, attempted to kick down Helen's front door before Steve intervened. "Please, Steve, I'm so sorry. Come home. I'm just doing what you did." "Why are you so upset? As you said, this shouldn't concern us." "I had no idea. It's just cruel. It torments me. I can't stop thinking about you and that old woman, Steve." "Yes, it sounds familiar. Welcome to my world," he said curtly, slamming the door shut. Steve returned home the following week to a much quieter Claire. She started, "I can't believe you did this to me, but I can forgive you if you can. I understand how you feel about all this." "That's your perspective. You've only experienced part of it, not the deceit and lies. Our entire existence here is built on lies," Claire persisted. "We're still the same people, the same marriage. The same marriage that led you to bed other men. A marriage you ruined, and I still can't comprehend why. Are you truly that tired of me?" "It was never about you or boredom. If we can't go back, we can build something new. Let's look forward to all those retirement dreams, to the things we could have together. Travel, grandchildren. We can still do it all. We still love each other, no matter what. It's not over yet, Steve. I will do anything to prove my love for you." Steve remained in the house, occupying the spare room, grappling with daunting thoughts about what he would do with his life if he left Claire. He couldn't determine whether failure or abyss best described his prospects. It's simpler to stay, and he still loves her. Considering the consequences, he doubted Claire would repeat her actions. The island was serene, and he had envisioned traveling, investing years in planning his options and sharing those dreams with Claire. Did he truly want to abandon it all? Claire pondered how it had come to this. It was all so bewildering. When her mother proposed an agreement, she turned it down. Yet Diana persisted for months. Then she encountered Glenn Fraser at a dance. He was exceptionally good-looking and wonderfully polite. They danced together multiple times at social gatherings, and they hit it off. Diana shared details about her own arrangements and how thrilling they were. She portrayed it as a guilt-free romantic escapade and never considered it an affair. It was simply tradition. Despite this, she knew Steve didn't see it that way, so she kept everything hidden. If he never found out, it wouldn't cause him any pain. The week with Glenn was marvelous. During the day, he planted trees and spent evenings in her bed. He was quite nervous, but incredibly charming and eager to please. By the end of the week, he had become a skilled lover. His size and physicality, combined with patience and technique, made him quite adept. Claire proved to be an excellent teacher. The week filled her with confidence. She felt like she had rekindled her sensuality, which had dwindled during the years of motherhood. Was it tradition or just illicit lovemaking, as Steve suggested? She had to acknowledge it was both. But didn't she deserve a bit of satisfaction? After devoting 22 years to raising children and being a devoted wife, she was certain it didn't damage her relationship with Steve. Things had never been better. She loved him more than ever. And after that week, they started making love more frequently. Jake appeared even more attractive, stirring feelings of arousal at the prospect of sharing her bed with him. Steve, always astute, uncovered the tradition. Aunt Melissa's memoirs had unwittingly spilled the beans. Claire and her mother attempted to persuade Steve to agree, but he remained steadfast. Reflecting on it, Claire realized that her decision to deceive him was perhaps the worst she had ever made. Yet she remained confident that once the pain subsided, she could win Steve back. All she needed to do was remind him of the strength of their relationship and their shared aspirations for the future. He would surely want to stay together for the sake of their daughters and future grandchildren. This argument could work in her favor. To Steve's surprise, their daughters arrived on the island just 2 days later. Nicole wasted no time in rebuking Steve for his alleged mistreatment of her mother, dismissing the notion of living apart as absurd. Meanwhile, Michelle appeared to be observing quietly, awaiting further details. A slight smile played on Claire's lips, suggesting she believed Steve had not noticed her manipulations and lies over the years. Apparently, she assumed he would shield their daughters from knowledge of her actions, prioritizing their protection, as always. However, all of Steve's doubts were dispelled. Claire had misjudged the situation entirely. Steve raised his voice in a manner his daughters had never witnessed before. "Your mother was involved with younger men for 2 weeks. They were younger than both of you. She doesn't seem to grasp that. I won't condone this behavior," Steve asserted. Claire promptly refuted the claim, insisting that Steve had misinterpreted the situation and that the men were merely doing landscaping work. Steve had to concede that she was skilled. She almost convinced him. Both daughters sensed that something was amiss, though their father's suspicions seemed far-fetched. Perhaps he was beginning to lose touch with reality. While Steve might agree with that notion, he suggested involving Grandpa Bill or the elders to arbitrate the truth. Claire feigned a fainting spell, though it wasn't very convincing. All three stared at her, puzzled, awaiting an equally poorly executed recovery. Steve regarded her with disdain. "I can't trust you anymore, it's over. There's no going back or forward with flashing lights. How will you face yourself in the mirror knowing you betrayed me? Nothing can undo that. And how will I feel, accepting this? We need each other, Steve. We've always relied on each other, making us both stronger. I'm right for you. Deep down you still know it. Don't throw away your life to punish me. I can handle this, Claire, but I won't let you ruin me. I'll forge a new path. We all must face our choices and stay true to ourselves. You'll have to live with the fact that you cheated, lied, and discarded what we had. I'll live with leaving the woman I loved, but you're not who I thought you were, not the kind and good person I fell in love with. I wish I could return her, but not you." Steve departed the island with his daughters, opting to rent an apartment closer to their university. The girls were stunned by their mother and grandmother's actions. He never returned. Before leaving, he set fire to the trees in the orchard. Claire watched the orange glow with tears in her eyes. Bill assisted Steve in selling the house since Claire lacked the funds to maintain it. The divorces of Diana and Claire created a scandal, sealing the fate of the remaining tradition. Diana was the first to be ousted from her elder position. Both she and Claire became social pariahs. No woman trusted or befriended them, yet they defiantly remained on the island. Several months later, Helen Brown resigned as an elder. Island residents noticed her spending less time there, eventually visiting for only a few weeks each year. When questioned, she revealed she now resides with her family near a place called Durham. Tom worked diligently on fresh test data, a monotonous and lengthy task that was crucial to his team's recent efforts on the test car. Despite his lack of enthusiasm, he diligently organized the information for analysis. His phone chimed with a text alert. Glancing at the screen, he momentarily ignored the sender's identity. Only after a lull in his data work did he glance up from his monitor, retrieving his phone to inspect the message. It hailed from an unregistered number, though local in area code, unfamiliar to him. Initially deeming it potential spam, he reconsidered, opting to open it in case it originated from a team member whose contact he hadn't yet saved. Clicking on the message revealed an unexpected sight, a carnally explicit photo. Bewildered, he read the accompanying message. "Pay close attention. You still have time at Bradley's 18. Ouch!" He reviewed the message once more. Pausing for a moment, he then let out a slight chuckle. It wasn't common for them to receive misdirected solicitations, and he was about to discard the message when he glanced at the image once more, causing his heart to skip a beat. Initially unnoticed on her left leg, so minuscule it was nearly imperceptible, was a tiny mole belonging to Alice, his wife of 6 years. Staring at her in disbelief, he desperately sought something to refute what he had witnessed firsthand. Yet the more he scrutinized, the more convinced he became that he was indeed beholding a damning photograph of his spouse. Rereading the message, he puzzled over its significance. Bradley's was a local pub. but not one frequented by Alice. He was in the neighboring town, so why Bradley's? At 6 in the evening, while Alice should have been en route to Boston, her team was gearing up for a significant proposal. The presentation loomed for Monday afternoon. The entire team had flown in today, slated to convene tomorrow for final proposal touches, and on Sunday for a comprehensive rehearsal before the actual event. As one of the leaders, Alice's presence was essential for preparation. It was currently 5:15 p.m. Her arrival in Boston was scheduled for 4:30. Normally, she'd check in upon landing, but it seemed plausible she was occupied assembling the team and their gear en route to the hotel. He contemplated phoning, but opted to address the message first. Nothing original, but entirely expected. "Who is this, and where did you get this photo?" he typed out. "Should I meet you at Bradley's?" Packing his belongings for the day, he resolved to head to Bradley's for answers. He needed to hear from Alice about the flight, so he sent her a casual, "How did the flight go? I'm grabbing a bite. Call me when you're free." He planned to maintain a low profile and unravel the situation. As he strolled to his car, his phone beeped again. "Alice," he presumed, unlocking his phone, but the message came from the mysterious sender. "I'll be there, but I'm sure you'll find someone more interesting than me." His head reeled. Quickly, he launched the Maps app on his phone and hastened to his car. It took him 30 minutes to reach Bradley's, and it was now 5:40 p.m. He would arrive shortly after 6 o'clock. Unaware of the urgency, he planned to head straight there, hoping to make it in time for whoever the sender of the message thought would interest him. En route, his phone rang again. This time it was Alice, mentioning the hectic time with her team. "I'll call you later before bed. Love you." He didn't think much of it. Their conversation could wait. His focus was on the meeting at Bradley's and how the sender obtained such personal information about his wife. His heart raced as he pulled into the parking lot at 6:12 p.m. The sender hadn't hinted at whom he was seeking, so he assumed whoever wanted to meet him knew him and would reach out. However, it was the suggestion of someone more captivating being present that troubled him the most. The message's sender possessed knowledge he lacked, leaving him feeling like he was being manipulated, yet he couldn't think of another way to unravel the mystery. Inside, he was in turmoil over the photograph. He had complete trust in her, and their bed life seemed satisfying, or so he believed. However, there was only one means for someone to acquire his wife's photo, and he was about to discover it in roughly 5 minutes. The prospect of this revelation filled him with dread. Stepping into the dimly lit pub, he scanned the unfamiliar surroundings, uncertain of its layout. Ahead lay a spacious dining area, while to the left stood a bar. Choosing a seat at the bar's end, he signaled the bartender, who had just finished serving a well-dressed patron, to take his order. He requested a draft and turned his gaze toward the dining room. A man, having placed his order, traversed the floor, heading toward a table occupied by cheerful individuals. And then he spotted what the message had hinted at. Alice sat at the table, graciously accepting a drink from a sharply dressed man, exuding charm in her little black dress and pearls. Meanwhile, he operated on autopilot. Approaching the table, he closed the distance to Alice, who, upon spotting him, transformed her open smile into a startled expression. Undeterred, Tom continued his stride, seizing the well-dressed man's hair with his left hand. Yanking it back forcefully, the man dropped his drinks and stumbled backward, crying out in pain as Tom pulled him past. Releasing his grip, Tom poised for a right punch, only to realize the man had retreated too swiftly, falling onto his rear before Tom could engage. "Don't bother getting up, Pete," Tom cautioned. Pete, now disheveled and drenched in spilled drinks, nodded silently, making no attempt to move or speak. Returning his gaze to Alice, Tom observed the table's solemn silence. Recognizing familiar faces, members of Alice's team who often gathered at their home, he pondered the peculiar loyalty to the team amidst betrayal, except for one individual. Someone present knew the truth and chose to divulge it. Briefly considering uncovering the informant's identity, he swiftly dismissed the idea as unworthy of pursuit. "I'm heading home. If there's any hope of salvaging our marriage, you'll come home now," she declared. Agreeing, she began to rise, but he motioned for her to pause. "Give me a moment to depart," he requested. Before leaving, he directed his attention to Betty Wilson, seated beside Bob Thornton. "Betty, Bill thinks you're in Boston too. Bob, is this what Hannah believes?" Their avoidance of eye contact and silence spoke volumes. Is the entire team involved with each other? He pondered. Regrettably, he knew that at least one of them was. The journey home was mechanical, and he was surprised to find himself in his driveway. Entering the house, he retrieved a beer from the refrigerator and settled into the living room. While familiar with Bill Wilson and Hannah Thornton, He didn't recognize the other two couples among the four present. Debating whether to contact Bob or Hannah, he realized he had little desire to engage in conversation and lacked pertinent information. However, considering Betty and Bob's deceit and the situation's gravity, he opted to send them a message. Just heard from Alice. The team's travel plans seem to have changed. Best call for updates. Now they were aware of a disruption and could choose whether to delve deeper. At least his conscience was clear. After about 20 minutes, he heard the garage door open, signaling Alice's arrival. Waiting in the living room, he watched as she entered, still clad in her little black dress, but minus her shoes and jewelry. Despite her composed demeanor, he sensed her readiness to speak as she settled onto the sofa opposite him. Remaining silent, he believed in the potency of silence in discussions, prepared to let it linger as long as necessary. But it didn't last long. Alice appeared on the verge of bursting. "It's not what you think," she began, only to be halted by his raised hand. "You have no clue what I think about what I witnessed tonight," Tom retorted. "I don't need a lengthy explanation. We're both engineers. We know there's no definitive answer to any question. Why is just a way to rationalize subpar outcomes, so I won't bother asking why. Let's start with something else. How much time? How many people? How frequently do our acquaintances know about this? Apart from those at the table, am I labeled as your betrayed man among our colleagues and friends?" "No, Tom, it's not like that," Alice countered. "We're a team. Our travel plans got disrupted, and instead of returning home and traveling again tomorrow, Pete suggested we stay in town to rest before the job starts. I didn't see the entire team there. Where was everyone else?" "Some decided to stay home an extra night and meet us at the airport tomorrow," she admitted. "But you chose to deceive me," he accused. "You seemed quite close to Pete. Is there something between the star engineer and the prodigy program manager that I should know about?" "Well, for starters, Pete is okay, and he persuaded Bradley's owners not to press charges," she stated, sounding positive. His eyes widened in sheer astonishment at her loyalty. "I couldn't care less about your boyfriend. If that fool hadn't stumbled, I would have given him a broken nose. And by the way, the verdict's still out," Tom remarked. "Let him press charges. I've already spent a night in jail. It doesn't intimidate me." "Fair point. This could serve as compelling evidence," he said, flashing a half smile. "Do you love him?" Alice fell silent briefly, gathering her thoughts. "Yes." Her admission hung in the air, and silence once again filled the conversation, signaling potential trouble ahead. "He's not my boyfriend. Nothing at all happened. Yes, I should have informed you about the change in travel plans, but it seemed insignificant. Whether I was in town or in Boston, it made no difference. You weren't expecting me, and I was still committed to the team. All we did was have dinner before retiring to our rooms. There was no reason for you to react as you did. He merely brought drinks. You completely humiliated me in front of my team." Now in full defensive mode, she attempted to maintain composure and feign indifference. He retrieved his phone, brought up a message, and slid it across the coffee table to her. Judging by her expression, he knew she recalled the photo and the circumstances, realizing denial was futile. Without further delay, she began again. He picked up his phone, activated the voice recording app, and placed the phone in his shirt pocket. "Tom, our team," she hesitated, searching for words. We're very close-knit in many respects, most of us," she continued. "We have a small group that meets regularly. Bradley hosted us all. We were the ones shouldering the majority of the concerns in proposal preparation. You know how much time I invested in our proposal? I can't pinpoint when it began. It was sometime after Pete assumed leadership. We collaborated closely, and I was drawn to him. And it just happened," Alice confessed. "Intentionality," he interjected. "Lovemaking isn't spontaneous. First you undress. There are numerous conscious choices involved. We both understand that. So please, spare me." "So, nearly 6 months," he answered his own query. "That's when Pete secured the contract, correct?" She nodded. "Team," he resumed. "All of you." He refrained from labeling the notion. "I mean, are you all involved?" She nodded once more. "Yes, Pete believed it fostered trust and team cohesion." "Is that how he persuaded everyone to initiate a company lovemaking team?" "Now you're being disrespectful. It's much deeper than that. I feel deeply connected to Pete and my team. More than ever." Alice's confidence surged. He sensed trouble brewing. "Unfortunately, you'll witness some personnel changes in your team," Tom stated. "What have you done?" Alice gasped. "Tom, if you tell anyone else, it'll cause further injury. Let them decide for themselves. We must accept it." "Alice, I can't stay silent and be complicit. I favor Bob and Hannah. Actually, I prefer them over Betty and Bill," he remarked. I informed them that my travel plans appear to have shifted. How your friends respond to their spouses and how their spouses accept these responses is their choice. I can rest peacefully with my decision. Tom, we boast the most productive team in Cramerica Inc.'s history, she almost shouted at him. And you benefited too, sir. Just because we held team meetings on Wednesdays doesn't mean you missed out. I never excluded you. You always had access whenever you needed. So I was socializing with my team earlier, and you were unaware. Do you want to discuss that photo you showed me? She taunted. So, now just because you know, and just because your ego's bruised, you want to diminish everything my team and I have accomplished? Alice hissed, growing angrier by the moment. It excited me. Tom's heart rate surged as Alice continued to defend her team's actions. And he briefly entertained the thought of forgiving her during the ride home from Bradley's if this was just a one-time thing with Pete. That notion has long since perished. He didn't need to hear anymore. He didn't want to hear anymore. But she persisted. No, sir. We won't let you off the hook. You should text Bob and Hannah to let them know you heard from me. We're stuck in Atlanta but have flights booked for tomorrow morning. That's the story Betty and Bill will stick to, and you'll support them. Got it? She yelled. There's millions at stake in this deal, and your complaints mean nothing. Send the message, then we'll discuss our next steps. What's next? Tom yelled back. There is no next. Are you leaving now? You, your messed up team, and your leader Pete can carry on however you want. We're finished. I'll find a lawyer this week and settle everything. It's a straightforward 50 split. You keep your pension, I keep mine, Tom declared. Go. You have reservations in the city. Use them. Head to Boston and chalk up another big win for you and your team. Tom, please send those messages, Alice pleaded, her tone much softer now. If we lose Betty or Bill before the presentation, the company could lose millions, both for you and me. We could miss out on tens, maybe hundreds of thousands in commissions and bonuses. Just think of the possibilities with that money. Just us. Forget about this misunderstanding. Please, Tom, don't let baseless concerns about casual lovemaking ruin everything. Pete says I'm on track for CEO status. I just need to keep doing what we're doing for a few more years. Don't you want that for me? For us? Alice implored. Just leave. He barely managed to utter a word before a forceful blow struck his back, knocking the wind out of him, leaving him sprawled on the floor with a knee pressed into his back. Don't injure him, Alice interjected. At least, not too much, she added. So, the jury's still out on whether my nose was broken, huh? Pete remarked, leaning in beside me as I lay pinned. Tom suspected there must be a transmitter. Now I know whose side she's on. Let's see whose nose ends up broken. Pete grinned. Grab his damn phone and send these damn texts for him. We don't have time for this nonsense, someone instructed, hoisting him from the floor. Only one person. Tom feigned offense, causing the person behind him to exert considerable effort to lift him, providing valuable insight. His adversary was a weak office type, wheezing from the exertion of lifting Tom to his feet. After being used as a punching bag, Tom caught his breath and returned to the fray. Unlike Pete and his team of polished salesmen, Tom's team operated in the field with the 160th SOAR Detachment from Fort Campbell, California. Though they weren't on the same level, after working alongside the crews on test missions, they were invited to support the Pillsbury trials, under the tutelage of seasoned veterans who piloted aircrafts modified by Tom's team specifically for their needs. If these individuals showed up at your door, it signaled the end of your days on Earth. Tom and his team developed the equipment necessary to enter hotspots and, crucially, to extricate themselves from them. They took pride in their contributions, ensuring mission success and the safe return of all personnel. The members of the 160th and their formidable passengers deeply appreciated the hard work Tom's team invested in making their gear operational. Among them, Staff Sergeant Troy Baker was the most intimidating figure, renowned throughout his sphere. From vagrants to colonels, everyone accorded him the respect he earned by accompanying his men on missions worldwide. He was renowned for his steadfast commitment to never leaving anyone behind, a reputation solidified during the Columbia mission. Staff Sergeant Baker instructed the young lieutenant platoon leader to stick close. It was the lieutenant's maiden mission, and Staff Sergeant Baker thought he was handling it well for a rookie. When FARC rebels initiated gunfire and ambushed their team, they managed to fend them off. However, when he glanced back, he saw the lieutenant sprawled on the ground, bleeding from a head wound. He's lost consciousness, the medic noted, assessing his vital signs. Baker knelt down, lifting him onto the fire carrier. He's gone, the doctor reiterated. Perhaps, Baker replied, but he's still coming home with us. The medic regarded him as though he'd lost his mind. "We've got over 5 treks back to the landing site through thick forest. We'll be lucky to make it back in one piece. But hauling a dead guy? What's this guy thinking?" The seasoned sergeant intercepted his thoughts. "I'd do the same for you, Billy," he assured the medic. "Stay close in case I need you." Their exploits became legendary upon their return to base. As the helicopter touched down, the doctor awaited them. The medic informed the doctor of the lieutenant's condition. Nodding, the doctor extracted a flashlight with a pen from his pocket. The medic watched in astonishment as the dead lieutenant's pupils contracted under the beam of light. "Care to reconsider your diagnosis, doctor?" the doc queried the medic, hustling the revived lieutenant to the operating room. He was one of those timeless figures. He didn't talk much, but when he did, everyone listened. He was irreplaceable. In an age of mass production and disposability, he stood apart. He was crafted by hand, unique, and Tom and his team held a particular fascination with him. During the prolonged downtime between missions, the staff sergeant expressed his gratitude by imparting basic yet effective hand-to-hand combat techniques to Tom and the team. He advised the engineers to be prepared for unexpected situations. "I understand the biggest challenge you'll likely encounter is a jammed copier or a painful paper cut. But if you continue in this field, you might find yourself in interesting places. So if you ever happen to encounter the local inhabitants, you'll have some useful knowledge," Staff Sergeant Baker shared with the group. "Let's hope that a paper cut remains the worst obstacle you'll ever face." Tom regulated his breathing, subtly leaning against his captor to feign compliance. Recalling the combat techniques demonstrated by the senior sergeant, Tom reflected, "You might find yourself in situations where you can't do much but endure the blows. It's not ideal, but it happens. The key is to remember that even when you're struck, you still have the ability to fight back. You just need to outsmart your opponent." Tom applied this lesson, passive resistance sapping the strength of his solitary captor. "Give me the phone, Tom," Pete demanded, locking eyes with him. "Now that you know about my affair with your wife, you're just another feeble geek. Do as we say, and maybe you can still be with Alice when the team doesn't need her. Don't forget the luxuries her bonus can afford you. Perhaps Alice will even buy you a synthetic companion for those lonely moments." Tom remained silent as Pete relished in humiliating him by coercing compliance. "Where is it, Tom?" he inquired, noticing the outline of a phone in Tom's shirt pocket. "Ah, found it." He reached for it with his right hand. Tom forcefully withdrew his right heel, striking his captor's shin midway and pulling it down until it collided with his Gucci moccasin-clad toes. Flexing his arms, he broke free from the grip of his captor, eliciting a cry of pain as the captor tumbled beneath his weight, unable to support himself. Pete's eyes widened in recognition as Tom swiftly extended his right hand, executing a shoulder turn as the first sergeant had taught him, and delivered a powerful punch to the center of Pete's face with maximum force, feeling a bone fracture beneath his fist. A geyser of blood spurted from Pete's nose as he crumpled to the ground as if struck by an axe. Turning to identify his assailant, Tom discovered it was Bill lying on the floor, clutching his leg and whimpering, "I think you broke my leg." Tom forcefully stomped on Bill's foot, eliciting another cry of pain. "That should erase any doubt," Tom retorted, pivoting to face Pete, who was attempting to rise to his knees, hands raised to his injured face. Leaning close, Tom whispered in Pete's ear, "Looks like you've got a broken nose, Pete, but I'm not willing to sacrifice for the team just yet," before delivering a firm blow to Pete's temple, causing him to slump back down. Adrenaline coursing through his veins, Tom scanned the living room for Alice. Suddenly, he felt a sharp blow to the middle of his back and the base of his neck, causing him to drop to one knee. Turning to confront the attack, he spotted Alice wielding a cast-iron frying pan. Her swing missed its mark, grazing Tom's side. Rising to his feet, Tom seized the frying pan. "Tom, we can still salvage this," Alice pleaded. "Think of the money you'll lose. I'll put an end to this extramarital affair. I'll stop them, I promise. Just you and me, like old times." Rubbing the back of his head with his left hand, he gazed at her, astonished by how swiftly she was metamorphosing from one version of Alice to another. For a moment, he likened her transformation to the alien creature in John Carpenter's The Thing, adapting to each new situation. He chuckled at the analogy. Interpreting his smile as tacit approval of her final plea, Alice approached Tom for a hug. He lowered his left hand from his neck to steady her. Then, after a brief pause, he raised his right hand and delivered a punch to her nose, not hard enough to render her unconscious, but sufficient to fracture a bone. Alice screamed and crumpled to the floor. "Doesn't it hurt?" Tom inquired. Your eyes are watering, you can't see or breathe properly, and there's blood everywhere. It's quite effective, he remarked. Why did you slap me? Alice cried out. Because I could, he retorted. His phone remained on, recording the events. Although not all the recordings favored him, he believed he had enough evidence to justify his actions. Recalling the advice of the staff sergeant, he surveyed the room. Decide when to act and wait until the moment is right. But when you do act, do so decisively and persist until you're the only one left moving, he remembered. Except for Bill whimpering in the corner and Alice attempting to staunch the flow of blood from her nose, he was the only one in motion. You've saved another ace, he thought. Doesn't quite fit your profile, lover boy, and Mr. Bill will be fit for duty by Monday. Such rotten luck, missing out on those millions and hefty bonuses, Tom mused aloud. I wonder what Art will have to say about all this, he pondered. Contemplating calling emergency, he hesitated, realizing that involving the police would preclude his opportunity to interrogate Alice. He approached her, where she sat with a dish towel pressed to her face. Kneeling beside her, Tom demonstrated how to pinch the bridge of her nose with her thumb and index finger. The rush of adrenaline waned, leaving him drained, and he slumped heavily into the chair across from Alice. Where did my wife go? The Alice he encountered daily seemed vastly different from the woman sitting before him, prompting him to ponder how thoroughly she had deceived him. Was it worth it? He inquired. Alice glanced at him and shook her head. It could have been, she replied. If only you'd agree. We were on the verge. After Monday, I'd be on my way to the executive suite. This setback will delay everything. I can rectify it, but it's a setback. So, becoming vice president was your ultimate dream? Tom queried. What about us? Deception, lies. Will this persist? Tom, you're so naive. Pete saw this. He warned me that your rigid ethics and Boy Scout mentality would hinder my progress if I allowed them to. He urged me to break free from your influence and forge my own path to success. Did he advise you before or after he took advantage of you? Tom retorted. You don't know the half of it, she spat. I tried to adhere to your advice like a dutiful engineer, thinking it would enhance my career. You want to know what really works? Tom remained silent. Sometimes when someone's about to self-destruct, you just have to step aside. He continued recording. Let me tell you, my dear husband, all your counsel didn't amount to much. I went above and beyond to ensure my assignments were completed punctually and within budget, only to receive a few, well done, girl. It wasn't until Betty pulled me aside that I discovered what a woman truly needs to do to succeed. Believe me, leveraging lovemaking to climb the ladder works. And it's a whole lot easier and more enjoyable, she asserted. So this happened before Peter came into the picture? Tom queried. Oh, for a clever engineer, you sure can be dense sometimes, Tom, she quipped. It was at a Christmas party a year after I joined Crimerica when I first surrendered to Art and never looked back. Wait, you're also sleeping with the boss? Art? Art Vanderlee? Tom exclaimed. Yes, Tom, Art, Pete, Bill, and anyone else on the team who can advance my career. Even now, if you think you've covered all bases, we informed Art of our whereabouts when we headed here. Now he's rallying the rest of the team. They'll receive a fabricated story about our absence. They'll have to proceed without us. But I believe the extra effort we invested with their procurement managers will yield dividends. Do I really want to hear this? He pondered. What the heck, why not? Extra effort? Tom encouraged. You've always been proactive, Alice. It was so effortless that I hesitate to even call it effort, she chuckled. Reminds me of that old joke, you know? The worst lovemaking I ever had was still pretty good, she remarked. At the bidders conference, it was smooth sailing with the men, so we had to get a bit more creative with Brenda, the standout woman on the selection committee. It's amusing that I can even seduce a woman, but I had to enlist old Pete for a boost. And considering the assurances that we'll begin collaborating after sealing the deal, our selection committee appears flawless, she remarked. Then why all this? I mean, if everything's in a haze, why resort to such aggressive tactics? Tom inquired. It was Pete's notion. Foolish. I urged him to relax, assured him I'd return home, pacify you, and make it back in time for the flight. But he insisted on asserting dominance. Look where it's landed us. Instead of being the face of the winning team, I'm here with you. As I said, it's salvageable, but it'll set me back. You don't come so cheap, he countered. Perhaps not, Alice acknowledged, but I'd still soar. Well, you certainly won't be flying now, he retorted. Recalling Pete's apparent knowledge, he suspected Alice had a transmitter. Art, are you listening? I'll contact the authorities. I'm certain multiple felonies are involved, not to mention potential fraud. This is a federal contract, right? Tom posited rhetorically. Yes, the feds aren't exactly lenient with what you call extra efforts. I'm sure you've got top-notch attorneys and all that, but perhaps there's an alternative, he hinted, leaving it at that. Moments later, Alice's phone rang with the tune of "Hail to the Chief." "Art?" she answered, putting it on speaker. Art's voice filled the room. "Firstly, let me offer my apologies. Pete's actions were a blunder. I can assure you the board will address it firmly." "Thank you, Art." Tom felt a weight lift. "It's reassuring to see you and the board take assault and fraud seriously, Tom. These are grave allegations. Lawyers will profit, but nobody wants to disrupt the status quo. We can pay the fines, Pete and Bill can do community service, but ultimately, you'll end up divorced and half as wealthy," Art explained matter-of-factly. "Is there an or in this scenario, Art?" Tom queried. "Alice always claimed you were the sharper of the two. Yet, I'm increasingly grateful I brought Alice aboard." "Indeed, Tom, there's certainly an or here," Art confirmed. "We, Kremericki, supplanted you in your wife's affections, and when you confronted the issue, the response was utterly shameless. Appalling." Tom grasped the situation. "Tom," Art continued, "instead of involving law enforcement, as you suggested, we could reach a resolution. I've just sent a photo to Alice's phone. Well, not myself, but one of my technicians. They assured me it vanishes post-viewing. Take a look. Perhaps this will mend some fences, Alice." She presented the image to Tom. It displayed Bank of Grand Cayman and a figure with numerous zeros. "And when will this come into play?" Tom inquired. "It's already in play, Tom. You've received an email with your account details. It's been a rough day for you, Tom. I understand if emotions cloud your judgment. Alice is deceitful, no doubt. But feelings don't count at the bank, correct? They just don't." Tom concurred, mimicking Art's tone. "Kremericka will cover your divorce expenses. Reconciliation is off the table. It's evident Alice will pursue her share. She'll claim her personal effects and pension." He pondered momentarily before responding. On one hand, he could take a moral stance, expose the entire unsavory affair, and let the chips fall where they may. On the other, he could simply walk away. Art had just given him 5 million reasons to consider the latter. "Does Kremericka have medical staff, Art?" Tom inquired. "Oh, certainly, Tom. We've got a few doctors on hand," Art responded. "All right," said Tom. "Better get a couple of them into the limo and send them over here for your team." "So, we're in agreement?" Art sought confirmation. "Regarding Alice," Tom clarified. "Precisely," Art concurred. "Is that all, Tom?" "Farewell, Art," Tom stated, concluding the conversation. Tom retrieved his phone, deactivated the recording app, and returned it to his pocket. "I knew you'd see things our way, Tom. We can still be pals, maybe with benefits once this is all over," she suggested, flashing what she thought was her most charming smile. But even her bright grin couldn't mask the impact of her battered nose. Her eyes darkened, blood crusted beneath her nostrils, and dried droplets hung from her chin. Tom found the scene almost amusing and allowed himself a smile. Once again, Alice misunderstood his expression as agreement and leaned in for a kiss. Tom extended his right hand to halt her, then grasped her face and pushed her back until she crashed onto the sofa. "Either I slap you too hard or not hard enough. Why would I ever want to kiss you, Alice?" She looked up at him, offended. "Take whatever you want, but don't be here tomorrow," Tom instructed, heading for the door. He paused beside Bill. "Still hurting, huh?" he asked. "Yeah, damn it, you idiot. It's still eliminating me," Bill complained. "Maybe this will take your mind off it," Tom remarked, delivering a swift kick to Bill's groin. Bill doubled over, groaning in pain. Tom got into his car, unsure of his destination, but food and shelter were high on his list of priorities. With that in mind, he grabbed a burger at a nearby cafe and checked into the Red Roof Inn just outside the city, near the highway, falling asleep as soon as his head hit the pillow. Despite enduring the residual soreness from countless, well, at least 100 assorted injuries inflicted upon his body, he rose early in the morning and reluctantly hauled his aching frame out of bed. While brewing coffee in his motel room, his phone chimed, prompting him to reach for it. It was a message from that familiar number. Without delay, he opened it. "Apologies for yesterday. Let's meet at the mall around noon. I'll be waiting for you at the bar," the message read. He composed a reply and poured tepid brown liquid from the coffee maker carafe into a paper cup. "Yes, I'll be there," he mused, setting up his laptop. It was time to delve into online banking. Back in college, long before encountering Alice, Tom had a professor in economics who advocated for having at least one offshore account as a safety net. With nothing to lose, and with the professor's guidance, he swiftly acquired a brand new bank account in the Cayman Islands. He dubbed it his Love You Foundation. Opening the account a decade ago, he diligently contributed whenever possible, amassing around $50,000 in savings. Now, his Love You Foundation was about to receive a significant injection. Tom logged into each bank's secure website with practiced ease, executing transfers from Comerica's payment into his personal account. He retained $100,000 in the original account. After showering, changing into fresh attire, he readied himself to rendezvous with the enigmatic sender of the message. Arriving just after noon, he spotted a man who gestured in his direction. Around his age, the man appeared suave and well-groomed. Tom approached him. "I believe you messaged me," he stated, taking a seat. "I regret how things unfolded. Finding the right way to tell you wasn't easy," the stranger began. "Why don't you introduce yourself and explain your connection to Alice?" Tom countered. "I used to be on her team. After 8 years in the Army, I left due to injuries sustained in battle. Comerica hired me about 6 months ago, and I joined Pete's team 3 months back. Mentioned working for Alice to a friend, and when he asked for her full name, we discovered a mutual friend. He asked me to watch out for Alice as a favor. Initially, everything was fine. I was warmly welcomed by the team, though the reasons weren't immediately clear," he explained. "Around 2 months later, Alice approached me. She's attractive and, well, persuasive. But when I inquired about the ring, she simply smiled and said, 'It's okay with you.' I didn't agree and made that clear. That's when things turned cold. I started getting the worst assignments and nothing but grief from Pete. I reached out to our mutual friend again, informing him of Alice's advances. He suspected there was more to the story and felt you should know. Pete sent me a photo of them, attempting to entice me onto the team with a reward if I accepted. Let's just say I don't approve of their tactics. I consider myself honest. I quit yesterday and reached out to you," he disclosed. Our friend mentioned Tom Troy Baker. "If it weren't for Troy," he replied, pausing briefly before continuing, "let's just say he bailed me out of a tight spot when I was a rookie lieutenant. I owe him a few favors." "We both do," Tom concurred. "What's your plan?" the stranger inquired. Art pretty much laid it out for me. I could involve the authorities, and yes, Bill, Pete, and even Alice would face legal repercussions. But with his legal team, it would likely end in nothing. We reached an agreement. You might view this as a compromise, and perhaps to some degree you're correct. But they took the only thing I couldn't replace. If I can't hold them legally accountable, I'll find another way to make them pay. It won't bring Alice back, but I may realize she's less indispensable than I believed. I've got a trip planned. Please pass on my gratitude to Troy for everything. I won't be returning to work," he stated. "And you?" Tom inquired. "Well, Troy always praised Baxter Inc. Now that you're gone, they might need another engineer. You'll find they have a different approach at Baxter. You might prefer it. The work is challenging, but the perks don't compare to what Tony's team offered," he explained. Tom grinned. "I think I can accept that." The stranger rose and Tom followed suit. They exchanged a simple nod and departed without further words. Come Monday, Tom was at the airport checking in for a flight to Costa Rica. Tamarindo seemed like a good place to unwind. Making his way toward security, he spotted a mailbox. Retrieving an envelope from his pocket addressed to the U.S. Department of Justice, Washington, D.C., he dropped it in. Inside was a flash drive containing a recording. Maybe they'll be interested. Who knows, he mused. Perhaps Art's lawyers aren't as formidable as he believes. With that, he proceeded to the security line. 9 months later, Tom found himself seated at his usual spot in a cafe. Anna, as charming as ever, brought him his beer. "Thanks, dear," he said, lifting the bottle to his lips. A piece of mail caught his attention. He held the envelope in his hands, devoid of a return address. He pondered who might have tracked him down. While he hadn't taken elaborate measures to conceal himself, locating him in a small town on the Pacific coast of northern Costa Rica would require resources beyond the norm. His initial suspicion was that Art's associates had located him. He left the envelope untouched for 2 days, cautious, but certain it wasn't a bomb. "Carlos," Tom called out to the cafe owner, "do you have a knife?" "Sigh, Mr. Tom," Carlos replied. Tom handed him the envelope and stepped back cautiously. "You can never be too careful," he reminded himself as Carlos opened it. Carlos passed the contents to Tom, who thanked him. Taking another sip of his beer, he turned over the envelope. Several sheets of paper slid onto the table, including a note that simply read, "Thought you might be interested," with a telephone number instead of a signature. The same number. Troy would have the means to locate him, Tom surmised. I can live with that. He flipped through another sheet, revealing a newspaper article with a photograph. The image depicted Pete, Bill, Alice, and Betty being escorted out of the Cromerica building in handcuffs. The headline proclaimed, "4 accused of multi-million-dollar procurement fraud." Tom couldn't help but smile. Maybe Art's legal team isn't as formidable as he presumed, he mused, a habit he'd picked up due to his limited Spanish and a fondness for hearing English spoken, even if it was only by himself. "Anna, another beer, please," he requested, extending his empty bottle. "Sure thing, Mr. Tom," Anna replied. "Thank you, Anna," he acknowledged, taking a sip and gazing out at the vast expanse of the deep blue Pacific Ocean.
Welcome to Lost Relation Chronicles.
That evening, it was just the four of us. My wife, Kathy, her sister, Amanda, and Amanda's husband, Roger. It was supposed to be a simple get-together. The night was warm, the pool looked inviting, and the plan was just to relax and have a few drinks by the water. Nothing unusual for two couples who'd known each other for years. But right from the start, Amanda seemed to be paying an unusual amount of attention to me. Every so often, she'd find a reason to pull me away from the pool and into the house. "Can you help me get more ice?" she'd ask, or "I need a hand in the kitchen." At first, I didn't think anything of it. Maybe she just needed a little extra help. But as the night went on, the requests became more frequent, and her behavior started to feel a little strange. Each time I'd try to go back outside where Kathy and Roger were, Amanda would find a reason to call me back. Her tone was playful, but there was something odd about it. Her hand lingered too long on my arm. Her smile was just a bit too inviting. At first, I wondered if I was reading too much into things. But when I politely declined her requests and said I wanted to go back outside, she took it a step further. This wasn't just flirtation or keeping me talking. She escalated things. Suddenly, right there in the hallway, she undressed completely. She stood there, completely naked, and asked me to have sex with her. I was stunned, completely caught off guard. Amanda, my wife's sister, was standing there, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it. Why would she do this? Where was Kathy? Part of me felt tempted, I won't lie. I'm not a religious person, but I do have my own sense of morality. I try to live by Christian values, especially when it comes to loyalty and morality. The temptation was real, but reason and my sense of integrity won out. I couldn't give in. No matter how desperate Amanda seemed or how strong the temptation felt, I knew it was wrong. I refused, telling her this wasn't right and that I couldn't do it. Amanda looked shocked, as if she hadn't expected someone to say no, but I wasn't about to betray my wife, despite how strange and unsettling the situation had become. Even after I refused, Amanda didn't back down. She grabbed my hand, holding it tighter than I'd expected, her eyes wide and pleading as she asked, "Why? Why are you refusing? Am I not your type?" I felt cornered, but I didn't want to be harsh. I tried to explain gently. "Amanda, you're a beautiful woman. Anyone else might not have thought twice about this, but some of us hold firm values on certain things." She didn't take it well. Rather than backing off, Amanda grew more determined, her grip on my hand tightening. She started trying to manipulate me, her voice soft and persuasive. "It's just a little experiment," she said. "There's nothing wrong with it, really. No one has to know. It's harmless." I stood there, listening to her desperation, feeling more uncomfortable by the second. Her words were persuasive, almost hypnotic, but something about the entire situation felt off. It wasn't just her behavior, it was everything. The way she'd been pulling me aside all night, and now, her desperate pleas felt calculated. Then it hit me. This wasn't some impulsive moment of madness or a fleeting urge. This was premeditated, a thought-out plan. Amanda had been working all night to pull me away from the pool, from Kathy, keeping me distracted. But if this was all part of a plan, a chilling question gripped me harder than Amanda's hand. Where was my wife, and what was really happening here? I knew I needed to figure it out, and fast. Yet, before I could act, I hesitated, doubts swirling through my mind. What if this was some kind of test? A prank to see how far my loyalty could go? I recalled a recent conversation with Kathy where we had joked about situations like this, talking lightly about loyalty and trust. Back then, it was just harmless banter. But now, standing in that hallway with Amanda, desperate and undressed, I started to wonder, could Kathy have actually arranged this? Would she go so far as to involve her own sister in a twisted test of my faithfulness? The thought seemed absurd, yet strangely plausible. Amanda's desperate behavior now felt too calculated. almost like she was following a script. Could this be a cruel, elaborate way to test my loyalty? Or was something else, something darker at play? It made me question everything, seeing how complexities often lurk even in life's most ordinary moments, waiting to be uncovered. Either way, I knew one thing for certain. I didn't want to continue this unsettling encounter with Amanda. The whole situation was making me sick. I spun around, grabbed the nearest bottle of alcohol off the counter, and stormed out of the house toward the pool. I needed to find my wife, Kathy, and get to the bottom of this insanity. What was going on? And what were these ridiculous tests supposed to prove? Amanda tried to stop me, calling out from behind, but I ignored her. As I stepped outside, I froze in my tracks, my blood running cold. By the pool, in plain view, was a horrifying sight. My wife, Kathy, in Roger's arms, locked in a passionate kiss. It wasn't just some casual, drunken mistake. They were completely entwined, oblivious to everything around them. As I watched, I saw Kathy's hand moving to take off her swimsuit. Rage surged through me, and before I could hold back, I shouted, "What the hell are you doing?" My voice cut across the yard, snapping them out of their trance. Without thinking, I hurled the martini glass in their direction, and it shattered on the pavement near the pool, splashing them with cold liquor. They jumped back, startled and scrambling to cover themselves. The look on Kathy's face was a mix of fear and guilt, and Roger looked just as shaken. For a moment, there was complete silence, thick with tension. Kathy, recovering from the shock, screamed, "Why are you acting like this?" Roger, trying to defuse the situation, raised his hands and said, "Man, what are you doing? Everything's fine. Don't overreact." But everything was far from fine. Just then, Amanda rushed out after me, no doubt hoping to salvage the mess she had helped create. But by now, my anger had fully taken over. These people, my own wife and the people I trusted, had betrayed me, and there was no pretending otherwise. People I thought I knew were playing some twisted game, and I was done with it. We were going to have a serious conversation, and this time there would be no more games. A tense silence hung in the air as Kathy, Roger, and Amanda stared at me, uncertain of what I'd do next. But instead of apologizing or explaining themselves, they did something that made my blood boil even more. They laughed. "Relax," Kathy said, her tone suddenly casual, as if nothing out of the ordinary had happened. "This is just an experiment, okay? We thought it'd be fun. It's wife swapping." "You're overreacting." Roger nodded with a smirk, as if he were calming a child. "Yeah, man, people do this all the time. It's not a big deal. It makes people happy, helps couples grow closer." My heart pounded as I struggled to process what I was hearing, but before I could respond, Amanda added with a sly smile, "Honestly, what's the problem? Why didn't you want me earlier? Am I not cute enough for you? You could have had some fun too, I stared at them, stunned. They were serious. They actually thought that this twisted game was something I'd just go along with. This was no longer just about betrayal. It was about how completely disconnected they were from reality, my reality. "You're all insane." I finally snapped, my voice shaking with rage. "This is not normal. This isn't some experiment. You've crossed every line," I said, my voice sharp with disbelief. "Do you have any idea what you're doing? To me? To our marriage?" Kathy rolled her eyes, looking bored. "God, you're so old-fashioned. This is the 21st century. You're just insecure because you don't get it. People do this all the time. It's freeing." "Insecure?" I yelled, my fists clenched. "I'm standing here watching my wife undress for another man while your sister tries to throw herself at me, and you're calling me insecure?" They all started talking over each other, trying to convince me that I was being unreasonable. Amanda giggled, throwing in her own taunt. "You didn't even want me. I thought men were supposed to like this sort of thing." "That's enough," I shouted, silencing them. My hands shook as I struggled to keep my fury in check. "Do you hear yourselves? Do you have any idea how disgusting this is?" In their desperation to justify themselves, the truth finally slipped out. Roger, attempting to calm things down, said something that hit me like a punch to the gut. "Look, we've been doing this for a while, okay? The three of us. We just thought you'd eventually be up for it. We didn't mean to hurt you." A cold realization washed over me. They'd already crossed that line, long ago, behind my back. This wasn't some spur-of-the-moment experiment. They had been planning this, conspiring together, and had been intimate for who knew how long. And now they wanted me to join their twisted little game. I stood there, furious and disgusted, staring at the people I once trusted. This wasn't about happiness or fun. It was betrayal, plain and simple. They looked at me as if I were the one who didn't understand. But I knew better. This wasn't freedom. This was a twisted violation of everything I believed in. And I wasn't going to let them spin it any other way. Kathy spoke up suddenly, her voice disturbingly casual. You know, when Amanda and I were in college, we swapped boyfriends once. It was fun, actually, just something we did for the thrill of it. After all these years, we remembered that experience and thought we'd try it again. But of course, you ruined everything. I knew you were gloomy, but I hoped you'd loosen up at least a little. I nearly collapsed from shock. My own wife, confessing that she and her sister had done this before, and that she thought it was perfectly fine to spring it on me now. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I turned to Roger, the one person I thought might still have a shred of decency. And you, Roger? I asked, my voice laced with disbelief. If these two have been doing this for ages, what about you? I thought you were a responsible, normal guy. Are you a man or just some yard dog, following your instincts without a second thought? Roger laughed, brushing off my accusation. No need to insult me, Ben. I'm just trying to live a little. Then his expression shifted, becoming strangely serious. Look, why don't we all just calm down, have a drink, and relax? Let's try it together. Right here, right now. You'll see. It'll feel good. Trust me, you just need to let go. Drink a little more to take the edge off. I stood there, crushed by the absurdity of what I was hearing. My wife, her sister, and Roger, the man I'd thought was a decent human being, were all in on this twisted plan to drag me into their chaos. A sense of despair settled over me as I realized just how far gone they were, caught up in their own distorted view of freedom. My mind raced, searching for a way to make them understand just how low they had sunk. So, you think you're modern, sexually advanced? Huh? You must think you're so enlightened. I looked at each of them with a mixture of pity and anger. Well, guess what? We're not on the same path. Without waiting for a reply, I turned and stormed into the house, my heart pounding with anger and disbelief. My eyes landed on a fire extinguisher hanging by the kitchen door. I grabbed it, determined to make my point clear. I marched back out to the pool, where they were still lounging, waiting for me to join in their sick game. I yanked the pin from the extinguisher and pointed it straight at them. Cool down, you scumsucker, I shouted. You wanted fun? Well, here's your foam party. I squeezed the handle, and a thick spray of foam exploded across the poolside, covering them in a cold, soapy mess. Kathy screamed in shock. Amanda tried to dodge the blast, and Roger just sat there, dumbfounded. Foam sprayed everywhere, drenching them as I continued shouting, You want fun? You want modern? Take it all. For the first time that night, I felt a flicker of satisfaction. If they wanted a party, I'd give them one they'd never forget. As they scrambled, covered in foam and completely thrown off, I pulled out my phone and called a taxi. My adrenaline was still pumping, but I knew I had to get out of there before I lost it any further. Before leaving, I turned back to them, my voice steady and loud. Kathy, I don't want to know you or your crazy sister anymore. And you, Roger? You're just a plastic toy in the hands of these two psychos. I saw the shock register on their faces, but I didn't care. There was nothing left to salvage. Without another glance, I walked away from that house of insanity, leaving them and everything that night had revealed far behind me. When I got home, I didn't hesitate. I packed my things, throwing what I could into a suitcase, knowing I had to escape. There was no way I could stay in the same place, breathing the same air after everything that had happened. A few days later, I began the divorce proceedings. It wasn't easy, but it was the only path forward. Kathy, Amanda, and even Roger still tried to reach out, but only to make me admit I'd overreacted, that I was wrong. They wanted an apology, a way for me to see things from their perspective. It was honestly laughable. So now, listeners, what do you think? Am I the fool here? Did I miss out on some great opportunity to join their twisted little game? Let me tell you, I have honor and dignity, and I refuse to waste them on the pathetic fantasies of pathetic people. You can judge me and call me an old-fashioned conservative if you want, but remember this. Those who rely solely on pleasure, chasing nothing but their own desires, are the ones who ultimately lose. I walked away with my self-respect intact, and that's something they'll never understand. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.
I wrote this story about a special bond I shared with my best friend's mother when I was younger. Even now, As I've reached middle age, I occasionally find myself reminiscing about those days. I want to share a story about that time, adapted to fit American culture and sensibilities. I grew up in a small, rural town. Our home, nestled among rolling hills, was a place where we could make ends meet thanks to my hardworking father. The elementary school was already a trek, but middle school was even further. I used to bike to school until it just wasn't feasible anymore, leading my dad to find me a boarding house near my school. I was a mild-mannered kid, and I did pretty well academically. In high school, I had a friend named Garrick. We got to know each other through a club we were both part of. My parents were quite tall, but I hadn't grown much since eating the meals my mom prepared for me in middle school, making me shorter than most kids my age. Garrick had a great personality. His face always seemed to glow, and he was tall. When I mentioned that it must be nice to be tall, he'd say, "What's the point of being tall? I wish I was as good at studying as you are." As I got to know Garrick, I learned he lived with just his mom. His dad was a professor abroad and would only come home once every few years. Garrick mentioned that once he got to college, he planned to visit his dad's country and stay there for a month. Garrick's dad came from a wealthy family, having gone abroad for his studies, where he met Garrick's mom during her own study abroad. They got married back in their home country after she completed her master's degree, had Garrick, and then she went abroad alone for her PhD, eventually settling down there. So Garrick's house was always quiet. My home, on the other hand, was bustling with my brother and sister chattering and helping with farm work, and we often interacted with our neighbors. My dad had relatives living nearby, which meant our house was almost always open to visitors. Living in a house full of people made me feel that it was strange when things were too quiet, while Garrick found too much noise and chow overwhelming and preferred to retreat to his room for some peace. This difference made me realize the contrasting experiences of growing up as an only child versus in a family with several siblings. Garrick lived downtown, and his high school was nearby. During self-study periods, he would sit next to me and ask questions about things he didn't understand. One day, he mentioned he wished we could study together every day, and hesitantly suggested, "I kind of wish we could live together." He explained that his senior year of high school was crucial, and since his house was spacious and he could have his own room, he thought I should consider it. After talking to my mom about it, she readily agreed. Living at Garrick's house might be a bit awkward, but after getting tired of the cramped and crowded boarding house life, I called home to ask my dad what he thought about moving in with Garrick. He said, "Last year's harvest was good, so we have some savings. Don't worry, I'll support you. Your brother isn't interested in studying and didn't go to college because he's caught up in running his own business. It's time we invest in our star student." Before moving into Garrick's, my parents bought me new clothes and went with me to say hello. They told Garrick's parents, "We know we should take care of Thane, but we're too busy with the farm work. Please, if it's not too much trouble, could you look after him for a few months?" And offered to pay rent. Garrick's mom greeted us with a warm smile and prepared a delicious meal of roast pizza and salad. She mentioned setting up a separate room for me, but Garrick wanted us to stay together, so we figured it out. Garrick, who had separate study and sleeping areas, asked for an additional desk in the study room and another bed in the bedroom. Living and studying together at Garrick's made me feel like part of the family. Garrick's mom, in her 40s and very graceful, said softly, "Thane, you can call me Mom if you want. It might make you feel more at home. Let me know what you like to eat. I'll make it for you." But I was too shy to call her Mom. Garrick was thrilled to be together all day, and we would go to tutoring after school and study until the early hours, helping each other with questions. Garrick and his mom made a lot of effort to make me feel at home, and my parents, even sending double the boarding fee, were overjoyed with my mock exam scores. And through a neighborhood party when I got into college, Garrick got into the best college in the area, and I was accepted into a prestigious university in New York. Garrick's mom threw a party and invited my parents. My parents and Garrick's mom thanked each other, and we all toasted with a meal prepared by a visiting chef. When it was time to go home, Garrick's mom suggested we all stay the night since we were like family. My parents, who usually went to bed early and woke up at dawn to work on the farm, had been living this routine for decades. Being welcomed into such a modern home felt like staying at a hotel, which was a delightful experience. As I was getting ready to head up to New York, filled with excitement, Garrick invited me over to his place. His mom had gone shopping for ingredients to make a turkey dish in the backyard. I grabbed a gift for Garrick's mom and hurried over. With my entrance exam results out and looking good, I feel like I've done my part. If there's been anything unsatisfying about staying at our place, I hope we can clear the air right now, I said, encouraging a night of uninhibited fun now that he was officially an adult. That evening, I found myself enchanted by a wine I had never tasted before, while Garrick, feeling under the weather, retired to his room. I ended up finishing the remaining wine with Garrick's mom. I thanked her for her kindness, and she mentioned having a model student like Thane stay with us has been a blessing. It even inspired Garrick, who was previously uninterested in academics, to get into college. I can't thank you enough. Because of Garrick, I feel like I've fulfilled my duties too. Garrick's mom, a New York native who had never lived outside the city, now found herself feeling a bit claustrophobic living in the countryside. She mentioned that now Garrick was an adult, she'd visit her parents more often, to which I warmly responded. I thanked her for making it so comfortable for me to study and handed her a shawl I had prepared, explaining that I bought it because she seemed to feel the cold more in the winter. Upon seeing it, she immediately spread it out and suggested we wrap ourselves in it together. In that moment, I felt her warmth, and we became one. Thus, we shared a secret, and I began my life in New York, using visiting her parents as an excuse. Garrick's mom would come to my studio apartment to spend quality time, though visiting Garrick back home during the holidays made me feel somewhat guilty. Fortunately, our secret remained just that. Now, I am raising a loving wife and adorable twin daughters. I'll never forget Garrick's mom's embrace at my wedding, dressed in a beautiful dress. Every year on January 1st, I make a point to call Garrick's mother to wish her well. Garrick's father, having retired from a university abroad, found returning to American life a bit foreign despite being American. He expressed a desire to die in America, enjoying rounds of golf with the lovely Mrs. Garrick. Having lived apart for so long, she now smiles and says she doesn't feel lonely anymore. I told her, "If he ever gives you trouble, just call me. I'll come and cheer you up."